Hi, everyone, and welcome back to AMC Presents. I'm your host, Allison, and today we have something really special in store. Joining us is none other than William Ford, the visionary creator of AMC Presents, alongside an extraordinary guest, Grammy winner and three-time nominee, the iconic American guitarist John Schneider. In this exclusive interview, William and John will take us on a captivating journey through John's rich musical career. From growing up in Southern California to uncovering his early influences, we'll hear stories of how a simple ukulele sparked a lifelong passion for music. With insights into his dual passions for music and engineering, John shares his incredible transition from folk music and banjo rhythms to mastering the complexities of classical guitar. But that's not all. John also dives into his exploration of microtonality, offering a fresh perspective on its significance in both ancient and modern music. Along the way, you'll be inspired by John's personal anecdotes about marathons, the folk revolution, and the dedication it takes to truly follow your musical calling. Get ready to be entertained, educated, and inspired as we delve into the life and legacy of one of America's foremost guitarists. Let's turn things over to William Ford and the incredible John Schneider.
Well, good morning.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good to meet you.
And you. So that's not a fake background for you, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. That comes under do as I say, not as I do. You got to have a brand. So again, it's good to meet you. You're currently in California.
That's right, yeah.
Where exactly?
Venice Beach,
Must be pretty pleasant place to be.
it is. It helps, being right next to the ocean sort of mediates all the crazy swings of temperature that are happening all over, right? Suits me, and I can walk and jump in the ocean whenever I want to,
Do you do that often?
as often as I can.
Is the beach there's in pretty good condition?
Parts of it, it also depends. It's a very interesting phenomenon. If it rains a lot, there's a lot of runoff of pesticides and things. And we have something called the AQMD, the Air Quality Metro District, which posts air quality. There's also a water quality that shows you where along the whole Santa Monica Bay it's safe to swim and where it isn't, because they actually do, I don't know what it is, viral counts or something like that. So,
hmm I don't know if you know, I'm a psychologist. Yes, which tends to influence how I do interviews.
hmm,
And one of the key things for me is try to understand how somebody got to where they are now in their career. And
hmm.
certainly you have a long and extensive career, but even begin with exploring where you were born, what your family of origin was, and things like that.
I'm ready for anything you throw at me.
All right,
Thanks,
sounds
thanks
good.
for the warning.
Sounds good. So where were you born?
I was born here in Southern California. I'm an actual native, so to speak, right? Which is pretty unusual for around here. Mostly the question is, where'd you come from, right?
And what about your parents? Were they musically inclined?
One yes, one no. My father was what they now call a triple threat. When he was in high school, he was given scholarships for music, for track, and for engineering. And he ended up he ended up going to Caltech at a very, very young age. The music carried on because he loved music and took us to musicals and all sorts of things. And he also started running marathons when he was 49 and ended up doing like 24 of them by the time he was 80. So
What kind of music was it that he enjoyed so much?
uh, musicals mostly, and he loved opera. I
Okay.
did not get the opera gene.
Right.
I'm more of an instrumental performer, so that's what I like the best. So
Do you recollect when you first thought that music has a pull for you?
absolutely. My first instrument was a ukulele. I was at the beach with another family, and this slightly older kid had a ukulele with him, and he was singing some songs. I was sitting right in front of him and watching his fingers, and I couldn't believe it that he would just change his fingers and something changed. I now know that's called harmony, right? But the fact that a feeling could change just by something you did with strings and fingers, I thought, ooh, I want to get into that. And that was my first instrument, was a ukulele.
And how long did you play that?
Not too long because considering my age, that was the beginning of the folk revolution, and I fell in love with the Kingston Trio and started playing banjo of all things. I started a group with my fellow 12-year-olds at that time, and the whole time I spent putting my banjo down and saying, "No, guitar player, this is how you do it." And then something dawned on me, maybe I should be playing guitar, not him. And it sort of took off from there.
When did you begin formal training in an instrument?
Interesting. I was given piano lessons when I was, I think, 7 or 8. It didn't stick. I wasn't that interested. I did take formal, I took guitar lessons at a local guitar shop, and they taught me chords and tunes and that sort of thing. It turns out my teacher was a jazz player, and I fell in love with jazz. But formal, my first really formal lesson wasn't until I was, geez, I guess 19 or 20. So it's a very strange story. My roommate's brother-in-law was Andy Summers of the Police. And we were hanging out one day, and Andy was studying classical guitar. And I'd always played by ear, didn't know how to read or any of that. And he said, if you really want to go anywhere with this instrument, you really need to study, and you need to study classical. So he hooked me up with his teacher, and that was my first sets of lessons.
So again, that was in your late teens.
Yeah, late teens. Other than that, I was totally self-taught, everything by ear and by eye.
Just jumping back a bit, what about the piano didn't appeal?
Not sure. Not sure. Funnily enough, now that I am very interested in tuning, it turns out that my brother was a prodigy, 7 years younger. He ended up playing on the radio by the time he was 10. But there was just something about the tone of the piano that didn't quite grab me. And ironically, I inherited that, literally that same instrument after my parents moved somewhere else. And I now realize part of it was the tuning. I didn't like what is now known as, equal tempered tuning. There was just something about it that didn't click. Now, I had the same tuning on my guitar. What was the difference? I guess it was just because the timbre was so different with all the strings and the percussiveness. Hard to know.
Interesting. When you began to take up the guitar, what did your peers think about that? Did they react to that?
They thought it was way cool. Yeah, very accepted.
And did you do garage bands and that kind of stuff?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I started doing, folk music, but then being a West Coaster, I fell in love with Buffalo Springfield's music and that Crosby, Stills and Nash sort of thing. And we did tunes like that, but also I could not avoid the Beatles because the music was so fabulous. So sure, I was in garage bands, and we played there were a lot of schools around here. A lot of the times I was actually the front man with a microphone, didn't even have a guitar in my hand. But sure, we played a lot of gigs.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how big were you? You know what I'm saying?
1.5.
Okay.
We were very local.
I assume you went to public schools throughout your...
Yeah. Well, off and on, I had a very checkered educational youth, back and forth between private and public for all sorts of other reasons.
And what about college?
Sure. Well, I graduated from the University of California. I spent a little time at UCLA and eventually graduated from UCSB, that's in Santa Barbara. And then I went to grad school in Europe, in Britain actually, and did a master's in electronic music, synthesizers and all that. And this is the 1970s, so it was very unsophisticated. And then I actually did a PhD in music and physics together.
Did you have a major in undergraduate school?
Yeah, composition, musical composition.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Did you compose with those skills that you had at that time?
I did, but ironically, I was doing electronic music and composing. It's sort of like when you ask folk singers or rockers, "Did you write that song?" And they say, "Yeah, I wrote that song." I said, "Show me the music." I said, "Oh, I didn't write it. I created it. And that's a lot of what was going on with the electronic music I was doing. There wasn't really a method of notating or any of that sort of stuff. And one of the reasons I actually went to Europe was to get a stronger traditional background because I was able to sort of skirt around not taking the regular classes. I sort of went around the back.
When you were being trained in Europe, trying to get a more fundamental kind of education about
Hmm.
composition, when you wrote things at that point, did you first hear them electronically and then write them for regular instruments? Or did the composition begin just with regular instruments?
Ironically, and this just really makes me laugh. I went to Europe for a traditional background, and I was I was accepted to this university, and I spent all summer composing a piece just on paper and maybe using a piano a little bit. And then I showed up the first day and gave it to my professor, and he said, "Great, I'll come back in a week and we'll talk." I was so excited because this is really the first pen and paper piece that I'd really done. And I came back that day. In the meantime, there was a week in between, and it turned out that that campus had an extraordinary electronic music studio. So I went over and sniffed around and introduced myself. I was in the physics department. And I came back a week later to the music department, and the guy literally threw my piece back at me and said, this is too hard. It'll never get performed. Write something else.
Well,
That is
that's
not.
uplifting.
Well, do you know what I did? I turned right around and went back to the physics department and didn't do my master's in composition at all. I did it in electronic music.
Oh.
So there you go. I still compose, and occasionally I do, in fact, use the synthesizer as a sketch pad. It's a wonderful way because these days it's hard if you're going to write a big piece. It's very expensive to get people to get together and play it and to see if you liked it or not.
I imagine then that you were familiar with Wendy Carlos
Of
and
course.
her work, which was really big in the 70s, 60s and 70s, I guess,
Hey, I
because it was so
was
groundbreaking.
absolutely, and that funny you should mention that because at that time it was his music. It became her music. Was exactly the first thing that switched me over to classical. I was listening to the music of Bach that was synthesized, and all of a sudden, the the lack of depth of the electronic sounds actually allowed me to hear the logic of the music in a way I couldn't on standard musical instruments. And I thought, oh, that's what's going on. And
Oh,
then
that's
that,
really interesting.
yeah.
That's really interesting. And I can see that. It really does tend to simplify the sound. I don't think in her transcriptions that the sound was all that sophisticated. It didn't really ape regular instruments.
Oh, not
So,
at all.
yeah, so that you might end up with a greater insight into structure and form. That's great. Do you have any of the compositions that you wrote early on still?
A
Do you
couple of
have any of the
pieces,
music you composed when you were at university?
not that's available. Yeah.
Do you ever take it out and look at it and think, oh my, that is wonderful? Or not?
I no, I do revisit it and think, what was I thinking?
Really?
Yeah, well, I'm a lot more sophisticated now, and I've heard and played a lot more music, and I realized what I was trying to do then, and I realized how green behind the ears I was, because all that skirting around all the rules and regulations of composition that I was able to dodge because I was doing electronic music, I missed a real opportunity.
Then, after you got out of your education in Europe, what then?
I came back to the States and luckily found a teaching job, which was kind of unusual back then, and at a community college, and started playing a lot. Started raising a family. Got into radio. When I was in Britain, I fell in love with the BBC. I didn't realize that radio could be non-commercial
Hmm.
and have real content.
Hmm.
And funnily enough, the first job I had before I started teaching was engraving music, actually creating written music. And we were listening to a local radio station, a non-commercial radio station, who said, "By the way, we're looking for someone to be head our music department. Anybody interested, give us a call. I thought, that's interesting. And I did, and I got on the short list. I was number two. They chose number one. But they said, we love what you suggested. Would you come be a host? Would you produce all these shows that you were talking about? And I said, yeah, okay, I've never been on the radio before. That was in 1978, and I've been on the air ever since.
Just jumping back a bit, what area of physics did you study?
Basically, real Newtonian physics, because the whole concept of my research was, why does the guitar sound the way it does? And why is it that when we change where we pluck the string, the color changes? What's going on there? There has to be a physical reason for it. So that was really what it was all about. Not into quantum physics or any, astrophysics or any of that stuff. It was very down to earth musical systems on physical instruments.
What did you conclude about the guitar in that situation?
That it's an amazingly versatile instrument in terms of sound color. And I answered the questions that I was asking myself, which was great. And I ended up writing a book about it. I was also very concerned. I told you about those first official lessons I had from a guitar teacher. About 3 months after I started that, this is way back when I was 18 or 19, a friend of mine said, "Hey, I've got this record you might be interested in." And he came over and played me Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. And I flipped out. I fell in love with it. And I looked at my guitar and I considered Rite of Spring, and I said, that's more interesting. That's when I decided to become a composer. And all the other guitar stuff was self-taught. But it just blew my mind because I was learning the standard classical guitar repertoire, most of which is really bad. It's boring amateur music taken up a couple of notches, but never, Beethoven didn't write for the guitar, Mozart didn't write for the guitar. And I thought there's got to be somebody in the 20th century who did, and that became the other half of my research. Who wrote for the guitar? How did they use it? And did any of those people pay attention to all those subtleties I had been discovering about all the different colors that the guitar could make? And that became, so it's half physics and half musicology all at the same time.
Are the principles that you discovered about the changes in tone in a guitar, is that true from guitar to guitar? In other words, is it a common characteristic across guitars to the extent that you know?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, every guitar, especially acoustic guitars, are completely unique because they're made of wood and every piece of wood is unique. So within every particular instrument, one can make all of those changes. Now, one guitar is still going to sound different from the other, but all of the techniques of moving the hand and doing all the fancy stuff that I discovered works within every individual guitar. So it is universal. These are universal physics, right? Gravity works everywhere.
Especially as you get older, I might add. Did you ever do something like, here are the specs for a composite or ideal guitar based on my research?
No, no.
Okay.
Just because I was too busy making music. I didn't go down that path because, of course, doing the physics of it, I have in the meantime, of course, been in contact with many luthiers. But the huge revelation that became my personal revolution when I returned to the States, somebody introduced me to a guitar with frets in a different place. And I was astounded. I was giving a talk at a conference about all of my discoveries, and the person after me was giving a talk about moving the frets and all these tuning systems. I thought, what in the world are you talking about? And I met with him afterwards, and he sat down for an hour and played for me. Went, wow, really? That changed my life. And everything I've done ever since then has been based on that one encounter. The whole concept that the notes we were handed on those 12 frets to the octave, it's totally arbitrary, it's historically determined, and there's, the human ear is capable of hearing more than 500 notes to the octave, and we're only using 12 of them. What's wrong with this picture?
Mhm.
So I started exploring different cultures and realizing, oh heavens, Indian music, Persian music, Arabic music, they have far more notes to choose from than we do. And it turns out that is in Western music a whole history of that too. And that's where I started to explore, which is why we ended up with this album.
Would you say that alternative methods of tuning are termed microtonal from the viewpoint of the European system of equal temperament?
Microtonal music is now considered any music that does not use pitches that are in the standard 12-tone equal tempered scale. Now, ironically, there's a whole school of thought called just intonation, which uses acoustically pure intervals. And that, in fact, is the unavoidable truth of all acoustic music. If you play a single note, embedded within it are something called the harmonic series, and that determines what is in tune or not. So, literally, from a physical point of view, modern 12-tone equal temperament is microtonal because it's off base of what is true in the physical pure tone world. And yet we've been brought up to say, no, this is normal, not that. And we're saying, no, no, it's the other way around.
I interviewed Matthew Sheeran,
Mm-hmm.
who's Ed Sheeran's brother, and Matthew is a composer, arranger, and he transposed easily Blackwood's electronic microtonal music
I know him well.
to orchestral music.
Oh, yeah. I actually interviewed him on my radio show.
Okay. And he points out that at some points there is no one-to-one, and it's just going to sound almost like you made an error
Hmm.
because there isn't, as I say, there isn't a one-to-one correspondence between everything that can be done electronically, for example, and what can be done with real instruments.
Well, we could really go down that path because one to one or one is actually a term used in pure intonation, meaning that's the key note. So that's kind of interesting. The other thing about Easily Blackwood is that he was doing experiments in arbitrarily dividing the octave into equal divisions, none of which are pure. So it's a wonderful experiment, and you get sounds no one's ever heard before. So that sort of falls into that's microtonal, right?
I also interviewed Chris Votek, who's a cellist, and he primarily performs Indian inspired music.
You bet.
And of course, so much of that is microtonal. So he had to relearn how to play the cello because it's such a different way of understanding music.
Oh yes, oh yes. By the way, if you know anything about my background, you know I am very interested in the music of Harry Partch. Chris Votek is actually a close friend of mine.
Oh, there you
He,
go.
oh yeah, his album that you probably received is on my record label, and I was the
Okay.
executive producer. And he has played with the Harry Partch Ensemble using an adapted viola. And the reason why he said, of course I can do this, is because of his exquisite ear from doing the shruti of the Hindustani system.
I was thinking about Harry Partch, and since I have lived through the 50s and 60s and 70s and all the rest of them, it seemed to me that 50s and 60s, very
It is safe
influential.
to say that he was a phenomenon when he was still alive, and especially his Columbia releases in the late 60s made a hit. But influential, he has always been influential in many different genres. I mean, people like David Bowie thought he was wonderful. Tom Waits thought he was great. But the, in terms of the spirit of doing unusual things, now his star is in the ascendancy again because there are now two or three groups on the planet that have gone influence. Heck, they've built his instruments to play his music. So that's a whole different animal. And again, thank heavens for the internet and all the new tech stuff. People have access. I mean, he used to be an underground figure where people were trading cassettes that they would make. More and more people know about him now than ever before and are enthusiastically embracing what he had to offer, which is wild. I mean, he would laugh. Or he received a wonderful award at one point and he said, too little, too late.
Hi, it's Allison again. We're having such a fantastic conversation, and in just a moment, William and Richard will be back to dive into Maestro Schneider's exciting new recording. But before we continue, I want to quickly remind you, if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It's a simple way to help us share more incredible music stories with the world. And for those who want to take it a step further, visit us at www.patreon.com/AtlantaMusicCritic. Your support at any level helps us enhance the quality of our content and reach an even bigger audience. Thanks for being part of our community. Now, let's get back to William Nad Richard.
Talk about your new album.
We've been talking about Harry Parch, and I became very interested in microtonal music. Now, a lot of the music that I have played is considered by many as avant-garde or strange, that sort of thing. But I've also become for years, in fact, what really got me involved with refretted guitars in the beginning was the music of Bach, because I discovered way too late in life, but as long other people have been discovering it at the same time, that the music of Bach was not played in modern equal temperament. And that was just a revelation. And that made me go further to ask the question, well, who else has been changing it? And I found out about Harry Parch, about Lou Harrison, about Lamont Young, all of those people. So most of the albums I've put out have been kind of fringy. So in the meantime, somebody asked me a couple of years ago, can't you just do a normal album? And I said, oh, well, I could, but everybody does normal. Now, having said that, there's a lot of traditional music that, like the music of Bach and 19th century, some of the music I scoffed when I was a young guitar student. It was built on early music, the so-called concept of a pastiche, where you write in the style of Bach or in the style of Schubert. A famous Mexican composer, Manuel Ponce, was very adept at that. And Segovia, when he was looking for new repertoire, because there wasn't that much repertoire for the classical guitar, said, well, okay, like Fritz Kreisler, we'll make some. Ponce, can you write me a piece in the style of Schubert? Can you write something in the style of Paganini, in the style of Bach? And he did all those things. Now, in the meantime, I thought, wait a minute, that suite that's in the style of Bach, what would it sound like if you tuned it the same way Bach's harpsichord would have been tuned, or his organs, or things like that? And that's what led me down that path. I thought, okay, let's look at all those pieces that have a contact with the past, all the way back to the Renaissance. The Renaissance tuning was even more wildly divergent than the well temperament of Bach, which of course is not equal temperament. So I took all my experience of micro tunings and historical tunings and said, great, I can do that too. I would love to show people what it's like to hear that music, but from a historical tuning point of view. That's the basic concept. And you know, the thrill about using a guitar for that sort of thing, if you visit a harpsichordist and he's tuned to, there are many shows, for example, where people have 2 or 3 harpsichords on stage. One is tuned for Renaissance music, one is tuned for French Baroque music, one is tuned. I thought, well, that's great. But you look at the instruments, they still look like harpsichords. You can't tell by looking at them. Brought a couple of guitars out just to remind folks that if you see that, you know something's different, right?
Yes.
The frets are just somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the joys about using instruments, or pluck string instrument, is that you can see the microtonality as well as hear it. So that was my way into that project. I thought, wouldn't it be great? And the feedback I've gotten too is like, whoa, that really is different. Way to go. I'd never listened to it that way.
I guess because I'm so locked into the traditional scales, it sometimes sounds out of tune to me.
Well, it is literally out of tune with your expectations.
Yes, right.
So, and some people suggest, in fact, Lou Harrison, who detested equal temperament, and said people's ears are gotten in those grooves and they can't get out of the ruts.
And to some degree, I understand the argument that Western classical music misses out on is the diversity of sound, because we're so locked into that regular scales. Kind of hearing music in a new way and appreciating there's probably more out there to be enjoyed that hasn't necessarily been composed by with the dead white man, as they say.
Yeah, no, no, it's very true, very true. Another joy of the high-tech world. We can taste anything, anywhere, anytime.
Now, how long did it take you to produce your record, CD,
Um,
whatever we call them these days?
my recording.
Yeah,
This was a COVID project because once I started down this path, the biggest part of it was arranging the music from Benjamin Britten's opera music, and that took quite a while. So probably start to finish, from concept to delivering a disc, maybe 4 years.
and where did you record it?
My home studio, except for as you know, one of the pieces is for harpsichord and guitar, and I went to the harpsichordist's house, uh, and that big suite from Benjamin Britten's Gloriana, the courtly dances, that has a full battery of percussion. I did not do that in my home studio. I went to a college percussion room where my percussionist teaches, and we recorded the tracks there, and then I put those together later.
But were you able to design your home studio based on the principles you brought over from physics, or was it trial and error?
It was more happenstance. It's the space that was available, and I optimized it considering the space that I had.
And optimizing it meant putting in sounds absorption and stuff like that?
Exactly, exactly. And where you place it and that sort of thing, and listening to the room. There's such a thing as bass traps, where in the corners of the room, the bass goes up anywhere from 2 to 15%. And, you don't want to have to mess around with that. You want to try to get as neutral a space as possible. On the other hand, at some point, it's almost impossible to get it completely flatlined. And now with the magic of, post-production mastering, you can actually, well, the term is equalization, right? To
Sure.
make things equal. So it can be handled in post as well.
Do you do most of the post yourself?
I do not. I do not. I do all the mixing and the editing myself, but for the final mastering, I always use somebody who does. I mean, they are magicians. I know many mastering musicians. I've watched them. I've listened, and they have ears and technology that I don't have the time to build up all of those tools. So it's better to just say, "Hey, I trust your ears. I love your gear. Let's get together."
What kind of market impact do you think your CD will have? Are you hoping for, or otherwise realistically know it's going to be? Do you have any sense of that?
Sure, sure. Because I have my own record label, and we've been in business for 10 years now. We now this is our 29th CD is coming out this next month. I know that the music that I produce and make, either literally physically my own or others, it's limited, it's narrow, it's a specialist audience. So I'm hoping to reach the people for whom this will be a revelation and a joy. Again, this particular album, I'm sure, will go further because the content is not fringy. The concept might be a little out there, but the music itself, this is music anybody can hear and say, "Oh, that sounds cool. I recognize it. That's good to listen to."
Excellent. All right. Well, do you have any points that you'd like to make? Because we're kind of getting close to the end here.
I just wanted to invite your listeners and your watchers to explore different areas of music, because I've obviously sort of gone off the beaten path and found some fascinating experiences that it just illuminated so much about the human spirit, which is what music is all about anyway. And uh, it's exciting to explore. And I would just really don't, first of all, to bring up, old cliches, don't judge a book by its cover, taste everything if you can. And don't let the algorithms tell you what to do, right? Search for other sources. Your program, for example, is opening doors that people would normally not walk through, and to really encourage people to continue to do that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I so thoroughly enjoy doing it because I've been able to interview some of the leading people in classical music, composers, instrumentalists, conductors, and so on. And it's been great. So I always say that my interviews go bacterial rather than viral. It's kind of a slow growing
Can I
infection.
steal that? That's beautiful.
So,
Well, I do have to tell you that, as I mentioned in our conversation, that I did not have a proper musical upbringing. I did not do all the things that composers are supposed to do. And as soon as I got into radio, I mean, Bill Schumann, I interviewed him for Schirmer. I mean, I've interviewed Pierre Boulez, Maxwell Davies, all the European greats. And it was for me kind of a journeyman position. I got to ask the sort of questions that I maybe would have or could have or should have analyzed and earned that information and that training for myself through hard academic work. But that that ship left. So all of a sudden, I found myself in a position to be able to talk to the movers and shakers. So I understand what you're saying completely. It is so deeply satisfying to be able to get
yes.
those questions answered and, touch the faces of fame once in a while. It's really cool.
All right. Excellent.
Until next time,
All right. Thanks, John. Hope to see you in the future.
I hope so too.
All
Thank
right,
you.
man. Take care.
This is Allison again. Thanks for joining us on this incredible musical journey. I hope you found inspiration in John Schneider's stories, from family traditions to mastering new instruments, and that it resonates with your own passion for music. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss out on future content. Also remember to become a patron at patreon.com/Atlanta Music Critic. If you have suggestions of leaders in the classical music field that you would like to see interviewed, please put a comment below. Thanks to Genevieve Spielberg from gsyartists.com for her help in facilitating this conversation. Keep chasing your musical dreams, and I'll see you in the next one.
Viva San Francisco, California. I got a letter said, may God's richest blessings be upon you. Da 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 da.
That's why I'm going to Chicago.
Even Sacramento, California.
Going east, mister? Going east, mister? Going east, mister?
It's the freights for you, boy. Even Colfax, Californiacs. Letter, highball, engineer. Leaving Immigrant Gap, California.
If you wanna stay in one piece, sleep on the back end of the oil tank, buddy. She's tough going down the other side of the Sierras.
Leaving Turkey, California. Even Reno, Nevada. La 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 la. La 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 la.
Hey, Mac, you'll get killed on that oil tank. There's an empty back here.
Even Spokes, Nevada.
I ain't got no matches, ain't got no tobacco, ain't got no chow, ain't got no money. Hey, Mac, is that blanket big enough for two?
Hey, don't sleep with your head against the end of the car. You'll get your neck broke when she jerks.
She's gonna hole in to let a couple of passengers by.
There she jerks again. That engineer don't know how to drive this train.
Another night tonight, going over the hump. That's another bad hump this side of Cheyenne. It's a bitch. That Cheyenne, huh? That used to be a bad town, but not anymore so much. They used to have a school there for railroad bulls. They taught the rookie bulls the best way to beat up on poor, helpless bums. But the schools moved to Denver. It moves back and forth from Cheyenne to Denver. Stay out of Denver, Mac.
Leave and win a mucka, Nevada.
They've gone.